It takes two. I thought one was enough. It's not true. It takes two of you. Just the two of us. It takes two.
Thank you so much for joining me here on It Takes Two. I apologize to the listeners in advance if my voice is a little croaky. I just came down with COVID as of this morning, but we are here and we are persevering. First of all, Sam, Arne, thank you so much for being a part of this process. Before we kind of get into things, why don't you both tell me a little bit about yourselves, who you are as people, who you are as artists, and how those two identities intersect. Sam, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, cool. So I was born and raised here in Winnipeg on Treaty 1 territory. I then went away for university. So I went to school in Halifax at the University of King's College. I did a bit of theater there while I was in university, working on my writing process and my directing side of things. Yeah, now I'm back in Winnipeg full time. So I do playwriting. I'm part of the Prairie Theatre Exchange and Manitoba Association of Playwrights unit. And I'm doing that and trying to get back into directing. And also I work at a museum when I'm not doing theater.
Yeah, you work at the Dalnavar Museum, right? I'm seeing
Yeah.
the Dalnavar in your little bio here. I'm not just psychic.
Yeah.
Arne, how about you? Who are you as a person? Who are you as an artist?
I'm originally from Alberta, but I've lived in Winnipeg for over 30 years now. I came here to sort of like start a partnership in life with my partner, Deb. And so we have two kids, Gislina, who's a theater artist, and Solomon, who's a filmmaker. Yeah, I love working in the theater, especially when I can work with people that are awesome people and awesome collaborators. And so that's what I try to do.
Amazing. So Sam, you were the one that came to us saying that you wanted to get in on a mentorship process. What were you kind of hoping for from a mentorship, or why did you pursue a mentorship at this point in your particular career?
A lot of it was me trying to find a way back into directing as part of a process. So I did some of that in a university setting, but that was in another province and pre-COVID. And then sort of with the pandemic and with moving, I didn't really have a way into it here. And I was sort of looking to build some connections, but also just to talk about process and how one goes about directing in like a professional, real setting.
Mm-hmm. Arne, when I kind of approached you saying, hey, Sam, this really cool person wants to work with you, what got you kind of excited about taking on a mentee at this point in your career?
Well, actually, at the stage I am in my career right now, I've been like doing this for so long, and also am kind of like trying to do whatever I can to make space for new voices in this business. I often think that what I would love to do more of is be a mentor to younger people. And I actually don't really know how to go about doing that. It's kind of like, I mean, you can sort of like try to be a good example to people while you're sort of working with them, but in terms of like structured mentorship situations, I don't really know where to go to become involved in those. So actually I was like, yeah, this is kind of exactly what I want to be doing.
Okay, so now we know. So if anyone is looking for a mentor, please contact Arne MacPherson. Yeah. He desperately wants to teach you things. So what did the last couple of weeks look like for you folks? What arc did the mentorship take?
Yeah, well, I was kind of just looking to learn in whatever way possible. And so with us, I kind of took on mostly just like having a lot of very interesting conversations. And I'd bring questions to Arne, and then Arne would not want to talk at me for 2 hours and try and make it less about talking at me as possible. And yeah, so we've just kind of been chatting about process and directing and art in general.
Yeah. Do either one of you have a specific project coming up, or was there any kind of example projects that you used for directing?
When I was sort of like trying to come up with ways of kind of articulating thoughts, I seem to keep coming back to a few recent projects that I had worked on, and one of which Samantha had seen. So that was sort of like a kind of a common ground where we could refer to things that we both had witnessed, you know.
Mm.
It was sort of like when you try to break down or parse or, figure out a way of kind of like articulating, things that are really intangible,
Mm-hmm.
like how to direct a play. It seemed like, yeah, when I was working on this show,
Mm-hmm.
this is what happened. And it was sort of like, became quite anecdotal,
Yeah, because no show is ever the same.
Totally.
Sam, I know that when you had initially reached out to us, one of the things that you seemed really passionate about was updating classics for modern audiences, or trying to figure out a way to translate the classics into something that was still accessible to modern audiences. I also saw that you got selected. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so I have a play that was selected as the grand prize winner of Fire Exit Theater's Scripts on Fire contest. That's what it's called. So that's cool. They'll be doing some workshop staged reading type stuff in May or June, so that'll be exciting. I don't know. I was thinking about it recently in context that my approach to things is so different as a writer and as a director, and I
Mm.
think I'm very interested in answering different questions with those two aspects of my art. And I don't know. It's a weird thing to sort of have both going on. But yeah, in terms of like updating the classics and stuff, Arne and I definitely talked a little bit about like why do Shakespeare now, for instance, and
Mm-hmm.
what the relevance of classical works is to contemporary society, but also just like, is there still value in doing these things that we've been doing for
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of years when you could be doing something new, and how do you do something new with something old, that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's always the thing that I'm struck by whenever I see certain works of Shakespeare that are skillfully put on is, oh wow, we are still facing the same problems like 500 years later. And isn't that so comforting? Isn't that great? Art, I know that you were one of the driving forces behind Shakespeare in the Ruins. So what is your relationship like to the classics?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think like I feel like Samantha and I had some really really fascinating conversations, and one of them was around this whole issue of the relevance of the classics and of Shakespeare in particular today. Really made me think about my approach, because I like to think of myself as a person who is interested in deconstructing these texts and is interested in, sort of crumpling them up and throwing them on the floor and stomping on them, and then doing them, but talking to her kind of made me realize that in some ways I'm a bit of a purist. And so I think it's just really important to be clear-headed about what aspects of these classical texts you feel need to be sort of like maintained, respected, and which aspects of them aren't useful to us in their sort of like original pure form. And yeah, and so it really allowed me to think about that. And I think it's okay to be a
Mm.
bit of a purist, but I think it's important to be clear about, what aspects of those ancient texts we're not necessarily going to just do like Shakespeare would have
Because
done them.
for doing a lot of things like Shakespeare would have done, there would have been no women on the stage. Everybody would have been in drag. There would have been bear fights happening next door, and life would have been kind of a bummer.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, we talked about, I think basically almost all of Shakespeare's plays, if not all of them, are super problematic in some way.
Mm,
But Samantha and I talked quite a bit about The Taming of the Shrew
mm.
and The Merchant of Venice as two plays that are particularly problematic. And Samantha, you just made this great point. Like maybe the way to do The Merchant of Venice now is simply to get a Jewish person to direct it.
Mm.
Or if you want to do The Taming of the Shrew, don't have a man direct it. And I thought that, yes, that this is just like the alchemy of the process of putting together a play is just going to be affected on every level by that choice. I thought that was really insightful.
Yeah. Sam, I know that you had talked a little bit about how you approach plays differently as both a writer and as a director. Since you're both wonderful multi hyphenates, do you want to talk a little bit more about what you find that difference to be, like as between writing and directing?
One thing that I've noticed for me as a writer versus as a director is that I'm drawn to some degree of naturalism that I find is more present in my writing than it is in my directing. I think in both aspects, one of the reasons why I'm interested in theater is for its limitations and because like the specificity of the form requires certain things, but also, prevents you from doing certain things or in certain ways. Like, you can have a battle scene, but you can't like have 500 extras run through like you could in a movie, right? Those sorts of limitations. And I think I'm very aware of that as a writer and writing that into my work. But then as a director, I'm drawn to these like big plays that if someone calls something a closet drama or suggests that it's unstageable, I'm like, let's do it.
Yeah.
As a director, that's very fascinating to me. And that's the kind of challenge that I want to run towards. Whereas as a writer, I'm like, okay, I am writing for the stage and I have to keep that in mind. It's kind of an interesting way that these limitations come into my work. And then when I'm directing, seeing a limitation not as a limitation, but as a challenge, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I totally understand that. One of the first plays I fell in love with in university was called The Clean House by Sarah Ruhl. And there's this moment that I remember so distinctly from that play of someone dropping the equivalent of a turmeric bomb on this white stage. And I remember thinking, okay, they're not going to let me direct that in university because cleaning fees and blah, blah, blah. But now it's been stuck in my head as like, I want to do a turmeric bomb. I want to make a all white set just look terrible. And hang the consequences and hang the cleaning fees. Arne, how about you? What do you find your different approaches to be as a director and as an actor to a piece of text?
Yeah, cleaning fees are always the thing that's gonna just it's gonna get you. It's gonna bite you. I just love that how incredibly different these two disciplines are. Like, and it's just so much fun to be able to hop back and forth. Acting is sort of like a different mental muscle. I wanted to say it kind of like simpler in a way. Certainly less cerebral in an ideal world. So I just love that these separate challenges, like directing a play and having to really just like you were saying, Samantha, like if it's a quote unquote kind of unstageable or difficult to stage play, all the more of a crazy fun mental challenge it is. And it's also like really about like a collaboration of ideas with people, with designers, and with acting. It's just about this kind of like Zen experience with your fellow actors on stage. Like how present can you be in the moment? Like I feel like I feel really privileged to be able to sort of like do both of these incredibly challenging things that are just so challenging in such different ways.
I also find that that's one of the greatest things about theater is that it's a collaborative art form. And even if I, as a playwright or I, as a director, may be looking at something that's quote unquote unstageable, going, how the hell are we going to do this on stage? I then bring in a designer or a really awesome person with a technical mind who goes, oh, yeah, I can see about 5 or 6 ways that we can do that, just depending on what you want. But yeah, it's that wonderful thing about bringing in other people who get to help you stage the unstageable, which is awesome. Did anything surprise either of you folks about this process or anything that you learned that you're really excited to take with you into your artistic practice moving forward?
I just feel like in general, like our conversations, they're just kind of a blur of like really interesting ideas, and like we touched on so many things. Like I felt like we talked a lot about sort of the practical end of like actually getting work as a director. And I was trying to my career has been kind of pathetic in terms of like employment, but I tried to be as helpful as possible in terms of like how to go about networking, how to go about sort of like putting yourself as an artist into the minds of people who might have the power to hire you. And so like maybe I had a little bit of perspective on that I could offer, but then I felt like when we started talking about the art thing, it was a real jam of great ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm trying to think, and all that is coming to mind is Arne has loaned me this book by Anne Bogart, and I
Mm.
finished reading it last night, and so I'm like, wow, thank you for this wonderful gift of book ideas. that's kind of really fruitful at the front of my mind.
Isn't it? It's an amazing book,
It
eh?
really is, yeah.
What was the name of the book?
Director prepares.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so that's been really fruitful.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like I that book is so wonderful. Like we were talking, I was sort of like thinking about these two books that I was thinking about lending to Samantha while we were talking. And this one book that I used to refer to all the time is this super kind of practical, step by step kind of like manual for directing, basically.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this is a really useful book. I think Samantha would that this would be a sort of a useful book, like in terms of like the nuts and bolts of directing. And then the more we talked, the more I found our conversations were sort of like maybe most interesting when we were kind of like wrestling with the big art ideas. And so then I was like, no, this Anne Bogart book is way better because it's like, it's not that it's impractical, but it's like, it's more of a philosophy book than any kind of a practical manual. I just love these ideas, just to think about how these kind of like big philosophical ideas are actually applicable to the simple act of, rehearsing a play.
Mm-hmm. I think I can't remember if it was you that said this to our Vic class or if it was someone else, but it's like you can do all of this great work on the text and ask all these big questions and ask all these big character analysis questions, but then you actually have to stage the dang play or go and say your lines. And so it's like having all of that prep, but then chucking it out the window is so important. So you have that in your head, but it's not going to show up on the stage 99% of the time, but then that's okay.
Does she talk in that book, Samantha, about the moment of when it's obvious that as a director that there's something you have to say, you're called upon to say something and you don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And so you just stand up from your chair and you walk to the stage, and when you get there, you speak.
Yeah.
I just love that, this kind of like courage and this trust and intuition, that she sort of talks about. Yeah.
Yeah. Just thinking about how this book rather than the other one ended up being what came forward. I think that's kind of like a perfect encapsulation of what this process ended up being, because I was coming into it being like, what are the practical steps that I take to get into the theater and direct? And like, I'm really glad we had that sort of conversation and that was helpful. But then so much of what was of value was these sort of like bigger questions of what it means to be making art and looking at it from a more abstract lens and how, and then letting that sort of inform my practice. Like, I think that's been very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you touched on this a little bit, but is there anything you guys have coming up? Any projects in the future or places where people can find you if they want to learn more about who you are and what you do?
I've got my play, The Incomplete English Dictionary of Lexical Gaps. TBD at some point in June or May, there will be a stage reading in Calgary. So if you're in Calgary, check that out.
Awesome.
And I've got personal essay that is published in a book that comes out in a couple weeks called Awfully Hilarious Period Pieces. It's a book about menstruation. So
awesome.
Check that out.
Woo! All right, wonderful. I guess I just have one kind of last question. Sam, I like to ask this to all our little mentees. If you were to be a mentor to anybody, what would you want to pass on to someone who might want to learn more about writing, about directing, about the classics? What would you want to talk to other people about?
I guess something that's been a really big part of my practice when it comes to everything has been just like not being afraid to throw yourself into something and figure it out as you go. And that's sort of like learning on the fly aspect of things. It really is just about creating the conditions for you to do stuff.
No, I love it. Great. Yeah, I think that those are kind of all the end of my formal questions. Is there anything else that you folks wanted to leave with our wonderful listeners? Anything I haven't mentioned specifically?
I mean, I just would like to say how much I've enjoyed this process and how appreciative I am that you thought that I was a person who might be able to help in this situation. It's been really great.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear we made a nice mentorship matchmaking moment. Awesome. Okay, well, with that said, this officially brings us to the close of season 2 of It Takes Two. Hopefully we'll be back at some point in the future, but until then, keep learning, keep creating, and keep doing cool stuff.
It takes two.
Thank you so much for joining us for Season 2 of It Takes Two. This season is generously supported by the Thomas Sill Foundation and the Canada Council for the Arts. This season is produced and edited by Daphne Finlayson. Original music for the show is provided by Paul DeGurse, with apologies to Stephen Sondheim for shamelessly airlifting part of It Takes Two from Into the Woods. If you'd like to learn more about this or any other podcasts in the Village Conservatory family, you can check out our website, villageconservatory.com, or follow us on social media at Village Conservatory.